And Israel has been given more and more impunity. There has been no cost and consequence. And then we get to today. You get to an Israeli government with people who openly proclaim ethnic cleansing, eradicationism, and you get to what you see in Gaza. And impunity has been the handmaiden to extremism.
So where does this leave us? Where does it leave things?
First of all, one thing that has to be absolutely clear is that the architecture of how we've gone about trying to make peace is inadequate, is not fit for purpose. And by that, I primarily mean the monopoly that the United States has had around peacemaking. I wish it weren't so. I think America has done a huge disservice to its own national interest, but that is the reality. But we don't live in the world of the 1990s. We don't live in a unipolar American moment. Geopolitics is shifting. So that's one thing. We have to make sure that any future peace effort, there is the engagement not only of the region, and the region needs to engage in different ways. I talked about Israeli impunity. The greatest moment of success for the Israeli mission to marginalize the Palestinians was the normalization accords. That, I think, gave the biggest boost to Netanyahu's belief that he could crush the Palestinians and get away with it. So we need a different architecture with the region, but also with global South actors, which I think is hugely important. The other thing I would say is things look incredibly bleak. I find it hard to confront what's going on in Gaza every day. I'm often watching your channel. But this has been an incredibly disruptive moment. And I don't want to spread false optimism. But against the backdrop of such bleak times, perhaps this disruptive moment where everything has been turned on its head will cause people to stare into the abyss, because that's where we are right now, certainly for Palestinians. But I would argue that Israel has proved how insecure it is when it continues down this path. I don't think it's going well militarily even. I think Israel's capacities in asymmetric warfare are being challenged. So the hope is that as we stare into this abyss, we can turn this around. And that's not going to happen quickly. First, we have to stop what's currently going on in Gaza. But then we're going to have to design a very, very different way forward.
Because, Daniel, I mean, you have issues such as, these are final status issues when it comes to the Palestinians, like the status of Jerusalem, like the Israeli settlements, like security, as well as water rights for Palestinians, Palestinians' right of return, of course, a very important one. Oslo didn't address any of those, or Oslo kind of muddied the waters when it came to these final status issues. We don't hear anybody talking about them right now.
Well, let's be very clear. Prime Minister Netanyahu set himself a task. He wasn't alone. I don't want to pretend that this is a one-man project, but he set himself a task to destroy the possibility of two states. There were plenty of aiders and abettors in that mission. He has gone a very long way towards succeeding in that respect. Now, we're constantly expecting the Palestinians, the constant demand from the Palestinians is, will you recognize, will you accept? What about on the Israeli side? As you said, all of those issues are no longer addressed. For me, that means we have to fundamentally rethink this. Either that's about going to deoccupation with genuine Palestinian sovereignty, not dressing up some Bantustan and pretending it's a state by putting a little flag on it. We either have to go about that a different way, or we can acknowledge that Israel has created one political space. And if it's going to be one political space, which is not inevitable, but if it's going to be one political space, the only demand and the thing Israel should be held to account for is there has to be equality.
Okay, so let me ask you this. Do you believe that Palestinians have a right to return? Do you believe that I, as a Palestinian whose father is from Haifa, left in 1948, was kicked out during the Nakba, does he have a right to return? And do I, you, Daniel Levy?
I do not think that as someone who never came from that part of the world, my family escaped, on my mother's side, escaped the Holocaust, on my father's side from Eastern Europe. How can I possibly have the right to go and live there if someone indigenous to that land, whose family was driven from there, does not have that right?
So that's a yes.
I think you could say that.
Okay, let's move on, Daniel. Another important topic, I know you speak out about this a lot as well, which is the rise of anti-Semitism, as well as the rise in Islamophobia. Look, the space for tolerance is shrinking at a very, very worrisome rate right around the world. We see moves by the Israeli government and others to conflate anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. So first, on this issue of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, what do you think motivates people to attack Muslims and Jews against the backdrop of this conflict in particular?
What worries me is we live at a time where intolerance is on the increase. We see how debates in the West around immigration are dripping with hatred. In its own, we live in a climate crisis. There's only going to be more movement of people around the world. And against this backdrop, if there's one thing we should learn from history, is intolerance tends not to stop at the border of one particular minority. It tends to sweep across the board. I think it's crazy that we cannot be in a joint struggle against this intolerance, racism, prejudice, as Jewish communities and Muslim communities. We need to be in that space together. But then you have this phenomenon. Undoubtedly, some people who criticize Israel are doing it from an anti-Semitic animus, but the vast majority of what is going on is legitimately standing up for the rights of a people who, to be quite honest, don't give a damn who their oppressor is. They are not against Israel because Israel calls itself a Jewish state. They're against what Israel is doing because of what it is doing. I understand that from the perspective of the state of Israel, it makes sense in their statecraft to deploy anti-Semitism in the defense of what Israel does. So if you're a state and you know that your policies violate international law, are oppressive, meet the international legal definition of constituting a regime of apartheid, as defined not just by Palestinians, but by Israeli human rights NGOs, by the international blue chip human rights community. If you know all of that, and you know that your plan isn't to change it, then what argument would you rather be having? Why are you running an apartheid regime? Or why is the person making that accusation doing so from a position of anti-Semitism? So Israel has tried to fuel this attempt to define anti-Semitism as in a way which basically criminalizes criticism of Israeli policies.
Is this sustainable?
I do not think so. I think the Jewish community has taken a terrible wrong turn in going down this path because we face sometimes real anti-Semitism. You see the outrage, which I share, amongst, we're a minority, I don't want to pretend otherwise, but the outrage that we feel that this is being done in our name. The outrage we feel that the values that we held most dear when we say never again, or when we were brought up with a Jewish ethic, are being totally trodden underfoot. But we also think it's dangerous for our community. So here's the thing. It's the year 5,784 in the Jewish calendar this year. It's year 76 of Israel. We have been around for thousands of years, if you believe that date. This has become a threat to Jewish well-being, the way that this issue is being played with and weaponized, and the way Israel is making alliances with some of the worst anti-Semites. Viktor Orban in Hungary, white nationalists in America, white nationalists across Europe. They're a threat to my community, they're a threat to your community. This is the worst possible way. Anyone who thinks that this ends well for the Jewish community apparently didn't go to History 101.
Okay, thank you so much, Daniel Levy. Appreciate your time. Thank you.
Because ever since then, Israel